Are you a geology grad student looking for funding to support your research? Well, the Geological Society of America has an amazing opportunity just for you. The GSA Graduate Student Research Grant. In this video, I'll walk through what these grants are, eligibility requirements, how to apply, what to include, what not to include, and tips to make your proposal stand out. So let's dive in. First, what is the GSA Graduate Student Research Grant? These awards provide up to $3,000 to support the expenses of your master's or PhD research in the geological sciences. And guys, this covers all sorts of earth and environmental sciences. So if you're like, well, I study paleoclimate, does that count? Or hydrogeology, does that count? Yes, most likely your research, as long as it's at all related to geo, does count. And while these funds won't cover your entire thesis project, they are perfect for helping you get crucial data analyses and/or fieldwork done. And you can receive up to 2 GSA graduate student research grants in your academic career. So if you have received one in the past, you can reapply, just as long as you haven't already received 2. And I want to emphasize that GSA tends to fund over 50% of students who apply. In other words, if you just apply, you already have a really good chance of getting funded, which in grant world is not common. In 2025, over 52% of students who applied were funded with an average grant of $2,688. So with all that background about what the grants are, let's get into eligibility requirements. To apply, you must meet all of the following requirements. First, you must be a current GSA student member, and your membership must remain active throughout the end of the award year, which is the same calendar year in which the application deadline occurs. Second, you must be enrolled in a graduate program, either MS or PhD. Undergrads, postdocs, and recent grads are not eligible. Third, your institution must be in North America or Central America. This includes the US, Canada, Mexico, and Central America. That said, citizenship does not matter. You do not need to be a US citizen or US resident alien. GSA does not consider citizenship status for these grants. Fourth, you must apply as an individual. Institutions cannot apply on your behalf. Fifth, you must not have already received 2 GSA grants in the past. And again, if you have received one, you can reapply for a second. However, your progress report after the first one must have been submitted on time to be considered for another. And sixth, you must agree that if your proposal is selected for funding, you will need to provide GSA your U.S. Social Security number or U.S. tax identification number if you have one to facilitate the payment of the funds. If you don't have one, you simply have to certify that. And that's all. If you meet those requirements, you are eligible. So with that, let's move on to how to apply. To apply, you will need the following. 1, a valid email address, as you will need to use the same email throughout the entire process. 2, an appraisal form submitted by your primary advisor, which we'll talk more about later in the video. 3, a graphic or figure submitted as a PDF file. And this PDF file must contain not only your graphic, but also a title and caption for your graphic, as well as a citation if the graphic is not your original work. And we'll talk more about the specifics behind this graphic later in the video. And 4, of course, you will need your research proposal. So this proposal, being kind of the heart of this application, is pretty important. So let's talk about what should go into this proposal. Well, before we get to that, let's go through the application form step by step just so you can see what's on it. The first couple pages of the application just ask general questions like, what's your name, email address, university, demographics, etc. But once we get to the proposal part, the first thing you'll need is a title. It's a good practice to make sure your title is informative, but not too jargon heavy. Remember that the reviewers are likely not experts in your specific research area. Once you enter your title, you'll need to select a primary and secondary topic category, and then select a geographic focus of your research. If your research is not tied to a geographic location, you can just select Other. Once you get to the project questions, you'll need to fill in the dates of the duration of your project, and then you'll get to the actual proposal sections. For the proposal, there are multiple sections, each asking for portions of your proposal with specific character limits. The first section asks for the problem, hypotheses, and overall objectives of your project with a 1,000 character limit. So here, you'll want to clearly describe the problem that your project will help to solve, your hypothesis or hypotheses, and the main objectives or goals of your project. And be sure to reference your graphic or figure in this section where applicable. The next section asks you to discuss the scientific significance of your project. In other words, what's the importance of your project to the scientific community? You have 1,250 characters for this section, but keep in mind, this is asking specifically about scientific significance, not societal significance. That comes in the next section, which is asking you to describe the societal significance of your project. In other words, what are the broader impacts of your project? If you've ever written a proposal, you have probably heard the term broader impacts, and in my experience, this is one of the most important, if not the most important section of your proposal. And you can't just say why your project is important to science or to your specific field. That's what you should have done in the section above. For this section on broader impacts, you have to explain how your project is important to the broader public and to society as a whole. So really think about the ways that your work impacts more than just your specific research circle. Think about any direct impacts it has on society, but also its broader indirect or maybe more long-term impacts. When I did this back when I was in grad school, I was doing paleoceanography research, which how do you explain to the broader public why studying ancient ocean chemistry is important? And so I sometimes had to reach a little bit, but it ends up being really important that we utilize our understanding of Earth's past to understand Earth's present and project its future. So you kind of have to really bring it into the modern day and how things affect society today. And so mine, I always related back to understanding climate change, projecting future climate change, how Earth's climate is going to have an effect on ocean chemistry and ocean ecosystems. And so while I was not studying modern climate change by any means, my work does have kind of indirect applications to that. So you really got to think broad when it comes to broader impacts. For this section on broader impacts, you are given 2,500 characters. And if you'd like more resources on how to write a good broader impact section, NSF has a lot, and I'll link them down in the description box of this video. The next section asks you to concisely state your research plan, how it will test your hypothesis stated above, and how the observations and data generated will be applied in order to achieve the overall project objectives. This is essentially a detailed methods section, and for this you have 1,250 characters once again. And remember, this is another place where it'd be good to reference your figure when applicable. And speaking of that figure or graphic, let's talk a little bit more about that now. Your graphic or figure should be titled, captioned, and explained and referenced in your proposal text. You can include both the title and the caption in the same PDF as your graphic. And this graphic can be a study area map. It could be preliminary data, whether it just be a kind of preliminary graph or maybe a full-fledged figure that you've already created. It can be a conceptual model. It can be a methods workflow. Really, it can be anything as long as it helps visualize and support what you're saying in your proposal. It can even be from another source or modified from another source. But if that is the case, be sure to include the citation of that source in the figure caption. And you'll have a chance to upload this graphic at the end of this application form, so I'll show you that at the end, but let's continue walking through it for now. The next page of the application form is all about your budget. You will need to include an itemized budget and a written budget justification. So what is allowed and what's not allowed to spend this money on? This is a super important part of your application because if your proposal is amazing, but you have items in your budget that you're not allowed to ask for, your application may not even be considered. So let's break it down. Allowed expenses, assuming they are fully justified, include 1. Fieldwork support, such as travel to your field area, travel within the field, per diem, room and board during research travel, etc. 2. Analytical work, such as chemical analyses. This is what I used my funds for back in 2021 when I got my grant. I had to pay for $2,500 of chemical analyses to analyze my samples. So if your budget ends up being just one thing, that's fine too, if it costs, up to $3,000. 3, specialized equipment. Specialized meaning only items not normally available to you. 4, internal university research expenses, such as equipment usage fees, supplies, computer time, thin sections or other sample resources, instrument time, etc. 5, external research services, if needed and not available at your own institution. And 6, technician or field assistant support, so costs for salary, travel, etc. if justified. That said, it's not common for students to be asking for field assistance, especially when the grant is only up to $3,000, so use your funds wisely. And now let's move on to what's not allowed in your budget. This includes your salary or stipend or your advisor's salary. Again, you can have funds dedicated to a field assistant or technician if needed, but you cannot ask for funds to support your own salary or stipend or your advisor's salary in any way. Other items not allowed in your budget include tuition, unless for a specific required workshop, ordinary field equipment such as camera, GPS, basic software, etc., conference travel, registration, or presentation costs. GSA has travel grants and other grants and funds that are available and meant for conference costs, but this one, the research grant, is not that. Other items not allowed in the budget are publication costs, institutional overhead or indirect costs, reimbursement for work that has already been completed, costs for travel unrelated to research, and any cost related to work on secondary research topics. So most of the things that are not allowed in the budget are pretty, self-explanatory. Don't go spending it on travel unrelated to the project. Don't go spending it on costs unrelated to the project, etc. However, there are a couple important ones like conference costs or publication costs. Those are sometimes, missed or thought, oh, well, that can be included, right? As long as it's related to the project. No, it cannot. So keep that in mind. All right, so now that we've talked about what you can and can't include in your budget, let's talk about how to build your budget. In the online application, you'll enter a budget table plus a budget justification. In the budget table, list items in decreasing order of priority. Include the total cost of that item, the amount you are requesting from GSA, and the amount you are or have requested from other sources. For example, you may list something like sample analyses, and the total cost of that might be $2,000. So put in $2,000 in the total cost column, and then you have a choice of either requesting the entire $2,000 from GSA or just a portion. For example, you might ask for a $1,000 contribution from GSA and then request $1,000 from another source or a different grant. It's up to you on how you break it down, but keep in mind the total that you request specifically from GSA can only be up to $3,000. Also, it's important to keep in mind that the online form does not do your math for you, so make sure you add up your totals manually. In the budget justification, you will need to explain why each item is necessary. Provide specific cost breakdowns. For example, if you need $300 for field travel, explain the breakdown of how many days that is for, why you need that many days in the field, how much you are requesting per day, and what it's for, per diem, transportation, lodging, etc. Likewise, if you're requesting money for sample analyses, explain the breakdown of how much the cost is per sample, how many samples you have, why it is imperative to your research that you have that many samples, etc. In the section below the budget justification, you must list any other available funds, facilities, or materials. Again, GSA graduate research grants are not meant to fund your entire thesis project. So in this section, you have an opportunity to explain the other funding, facilities, materials, and equipment that will help support the rest of your thesis project. You also have a chance below this section to list any additional grants that have supported your project, whether it be past support, current support, or grants that you are planning on applying for to fund the remaining costs listed in your budget. This list should include funds available to or applied for by the thesis supervisor if they can support your project. Of course, if you have no other funding available to you and your advisor doesn't have any grants that can help fund your project yet, then that's fine. You can leave that blank. Below this, you must say whether you've ever received a GSA graduate student research grant, and if so, you must copy and paste your project report into the space provided. Now, moving to the next page. This is where you'll include an abbreviated version of your resume or CV in under 2,500 characters. For this, make sure to include your educational history, any major positions held, and any significant accomplishments, especially those related to your work on this project or in grad school. The reviewers will use this section to evaluate your qualifications to undertake your proposed research. The next section is a references section. This is where you can include full citations of any and all references you included in the previous sections of your proposal or in your graphic caption. You have a 2,500 character limit for this as well. And lastly, onto your personal statement. This statement should describe your long-term educational and professional goals, how GSA funding will help you reach your goals, and any obstacles you've faced along the way. You only have 1,000 characters for this section, so be as clear and concise as possible here. Finally, beneath your personal statement, you will be asked to select how important GSA funding is to you, and then you can accept the terms below and then press save and continue. This will bring you to a page where you can upload the PDF file containing your titled and captioned graphic. Then once you've done that, you'll also find a spot where you can enter your advisor's name and email address and then press send request. This will prompt your advisor to fill out and submit the appraisal form. But keep in mind, it's a good idea to give them at least a week or two to get this done. So be sure to sign into the system and prompt them as soon as possible, even if you haven't finished editing your proposal yet. So that's it for the actual application process. The deadline for submitting your application for the 2026 Grad Student Research Grant Cycle is February 18th, 2026. But if you are watching this in future years, the deadline is always, mid to late February, so keep that in mind. Also, you can check the website. It'll always have the deadline first and foremost on the page. Here's some tips and best practices to think about as you start to write your proposal. 1. Be very specific, especially in the budget. When it comes to the proposal sections, describe only the portion of your thesis that you're requesting funding for. Avoid describing your entire dissertation. Reviewers appreciate clarity, good organization, and a realistic scope. Also, keep in mind the character limits are not that long. You can pretty quickly fill up 2,000 characters, so be concise and clear. 2. Have a clear hypothesis and project objectives. Vague goals do not stand out. 3. Show feasibility. Reviewers want work that can be done. 4. Include a strong figure. Maps, data, and models really help reviewers immediately understand your project. Don't make it something that just adds complexity. Make sure it actually helps explain the project better, specifically to a non-expert. 5. Write in plain language. Avoid jargon and overly complex sentences. 6. Ask your advisor to review your proposal early. Give them time for this. Don't wait to the last minute. 7. Prompt your advisor for the appraisal request as soon as you can. Again, you do not have to fill out the entire application before you send the appraisal request to your advisor. Just save your application how it is and then go back and fill it in later. The sooner your advisor knows that they need to submit a form on your behalf, the more likely they'll get it done on time. And it is your responsibility to make sure they submit this on time. So be sure to send them reminders as needed. And finally, GSA takes scientific ethics seriously. GSA screens applications for plagiarism, so be sure your proposal is your own original writing. Research misconduct, including fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism, can result in being denied the grant, being barred from applying again, notifying your advisor, and even terminating your GSA membership. This is a great opportunity to practice good scientific writing habits, to cite properly, to paraphrase, and write in your own voice. And so those are all the tips and best practices I have for you guys, and the last portion of this video will be talking about what happens if and when you get awarded. If you receive a GSA grant, here's what happens next. You may need to provide your social security number or tax identification number if you have one, and GSA may issue a 1099 tax form at the year's end. For the use of funds, you must stick to the research described in your proposal. If you're thinking about changing any of your research plans, notify GSA first. And if you get any other funding, also notify GSA. If you do not complete the project, unused funds must be returned. You will need to turn in a progress report by February 1st the following year. And while you're not required to, GSA highly encourages you to present or publish your results at meetings and in scientific journals. And if you do so, be sure to acknowledge GSA's support. Well, that's everything you need to know about how to apply to the GSA Graduate Student Research Grant. Best of luck with your application, and be sure to check out the description box below for links to other helpful resources. And comment below if you have any further questions.